I'm Josh Hammer, and this is The Josh Hammer Show. Are we seeing the beginning of the end, or perhaps even the middle of the end, of one of this nation's most pernicious social contagions? Are we seeing the end of the full-fledged rainbow jihad in these United States? I speak of the transgenderism craze, a social and psychological craze that has taken the country by storm for far, far, far too long. Indeed, it was shortly after the same-sex marriage movement achieved its constitutional solidification in the 2015 Obergefell case. It was shortly after that the new frontier of the rainbow agenda of the LGBT social crusade quickly, without any hiccup, moved from the marriage issue to the transgenderism issue. Through the first Trump administration, leftist LGBT forces were on the march. In the Biden administration, it was solemnified and it was solidified that this was the new tip of the spear, that when the left identifies today, this all came to be in the past years, when the left came out as identifying as transgender and solidifying this and saying that this is okay. Forget about when Lady Gaga saying many years ago, born this way. No. Now you actually could be born in the wrong body. This whole nonsense, this whole notion that biological chromosomal structure doesn't actually play a role, and that you actually could be born in the wrong body. Contrary, ironically, to what the homosexual movement said for many, many years. They said for many, many years that if you were homosexually inclined, that you were actually born this way. Actually, no, said the transgender movement. You could be born in the wrong body. So it never made any sense, but this became the new civil rights frontier. For many, many leftists on the front lines of this social contagion for much of the past decade, this was their civil rights crusade. The Rosa Parks era social crusaders, the civil rights movement, they marched in Selma, Alabama. They sat in the front of the bus. Martin Luther King Jr. marched in D.C., and he had his famous I Have a Dream speech, his letter from a Birmingham jail. But no, gosh darn it, this was going to be this generation's social crusade. If you can't tell, I am being over-the-top facetious here. But really, I mean, the data on this for a while were just simply extraordinary. So 2.5 years ago in 2023, there was a comprehensive survey that was done for the then incoming fall 2023 freshman class across many Ivy League schools. And the percentage of this was just utterly astounding. At the time, 7% of Americans identified as some variety of LGBTQ+. By the way, even 7% is insane. So, I mean, we're working here off of a crazy, crazy baseline. The notion that 7% of Americans actually suffer from some excess of same-sex sexual attraction, or actually suffer from what the DSM for decades referred to as gender dysphoria, a certified categorical mental illness. The notion that 7% of Americans had that is insane. Okay? But that's the baseline off of which we're working in this summer 2023 poll. And at the time, Brown University, arguably the most liberal of all the Ivy League schools, 38% of their student body identified as some variety of LGBT. Princeton University, the number one school in the country every year based on U.S. News and World Report rankings, not that it means anything. More than a third of students at Princeton identified as some variety of LGBT. Yale and Harvard basically barely behind there. Folks, this doesn't happen due to just organic bubbling up. It's a social contagion. Because if you identify as transgender, if you say that you're a man, but you think you're a girl, but if you're a girl, you think you're a boy there, you, according to the woke DEI catechism, were given certain types of benefits. You can call yourself an oppressor, or an oppressed, I should say, in the outrageous woke neo-Marxist, oppressor-oppressed, faux moral dichotomy. And you got new social benefits to go along with your new, catchy, and all too alluring oppressed status. It seems to me that those days are now coming to an end. Just yesterday, on Tuesday, February 3rd, the American Society of Plastic Surgeons became the first major medical organization in the United States to publish guidance explicitly saying that doctors should not perform so-called transgender surgeries, by which we mean chemical castration, genital mutilation, and all sorts of other Dr. Mengele-style irreversible damage to minors. This is the first time, again, that a major American medical organization has published such guidance. This is just an excerpt there from this report from the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, which represents the vast majority of plastic surgeons in America. They said, quote, when evidence regarding benefit is limited, natural history is uncertain, and fully informed consent a challenge, then we believe that plastic surgeons should adopt a posture of heightened caution, enhanced documentation, and explicit uncertainty disclosure, recognizing that our role is not simply technical, but also ethical. Remarkably, the AMA, the American Medical Association, has now followed this by coming out broadly agreeing, not entirely, but broadly agreeing with the American Society of Plastic Surgeons. So in a statement to National Review, because I guess they're too cowardly to put this out as a full public statement, but a statement to National Review, the long-standing conservative publication, the American Medical Association says that because, quote, the evidence for gender-affirming surgical intervention in minors is insufficient for us to make a definitive statement, we therefore agree with the American Society of Plastic Surgeons that surgical interventions in minors should be generally deferred to adulthood. This is essentially a 180-degree turn that they have pulled. And if they've pulled a 180-degree turn, that is to say the AMA, which is the nation's umbrella organization when it comes to the medical profession. Think about the ABA for lawyers, American Bar Association, it's the AMA. It's a big deal. If they're basically quietly, surreptitiously, again, they're too cowardly to put out a formal statement, but if they're saying to National Review in an on-record statement that the evidence for this is insufficient for us to make a definitive statement there, and we agree that this should at least be deferred until adulthood, that's a big deal. And if doing this 180-degree turn on genital mutilation, on so-called surgeries, then what about hormones? So, I mean, what about hormone injection? I mean, what about all the rest of the Dr. Mengele-style so-called interventions that have been wronging gender dysphoria adult America youths and adolescents and teenagers for years and years and years now? The timing of this, by the way, is super, super relevant. So earlier this week, we covered a remarkable legal case happening out of New York State, indeed actually emanating out of my own home county, Westchester County, New York, where you had a transgender individual by the name of Fox Varian, who at the age of 16, she's a biological female, at the age of 16, got the go-ahead from a psychologist and a surgeon to do a double mastectomy. Well, Fox Varian has subsequently sued for medical malpractice, and this brand new judgment out of New York State was awarded $2 million against the psychologists and the so-called doctors, the Hippocratic Oath violating doctors, who chopped off her healthy teenage breasts, and now she's without breasts for the rest of her life. One of these so-called detransitioners, the first time winning a multi-million-dollar medical malpractice lawsuit. So basically what's happening here is the American Society of Plastic Surgeons is looking at this saying, oh my God, if we don't tone this down, we're going to be putting our plastic surgeons potentially on the hook for millions, dare I say even billions, in a mass class action lawsuit potentially, God willing, I say, when it comes to legal liability. Can't do that. The AMA is looking at this and saying, oh man, can't do that. What's worth, the Department of Health and Human Services under Secretary RFK Jr. has come out with a statement where they are applauding the American Society of Plastic Surgeons. Secretary Kennedy saying that they are commending the American Society of Plastic Surgeons for standing up to the over-medicalization lobby and defending sound science. Deputy Health and Human Services Secretary Jim O'Neill saying there's another victory for biological truth. The American Society of Plastic Surgeons has set the scientific and medical standard for all provider groups to follow. And indeed, it will be interesting to see exactly which groups go ahead and follow. Now that you've had this massive judgment in New York State, God willing, may there be 1,000 litigation flowers bloom. We explained earlier this week that this is the way. I've been saying this for years, for literally years, probably since I was in law school, honestly, ever since this whole social craze started. The way this ends is in the courts. You're not going to get these medical organizations, these doctors, to stop doing this ideological induced stuff, and it is deeply ideological induced. The whole genital mutilation, chemical castration, so-called surgery phenomenon is directly intellectually downstream of the woke neo-Marxist mentality. And the sexual revolution, it all logically flows. You're not going to get ideologues to stop performing ideologically induced actions unless and until they are at the gunpoint of legal liability. So a mass class action lawsuit, easier said than done when it comes to Rule 23 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. There's famously stringencies and difficulties when it comes to certifying a class. You have to have a similar harm, a similar standing, etc. It's a fairly intricate legal doctrine, neither here nor there for today's show purposes. But that, in theory, is the way this ends. is a mass class action lawsuit. And more generally speaking, you're also seeing other legal victories as well, or at least impending legal victories. So it wasn't in the distant past, it was just a few weeks ago, actually, that it was Transgender Athlete Day at the United States Supreme Court. There were these two cases out of Idaho and West Virginia, very similar laws in place, laws prohibiting biological males from competing against biological females in high school athletic competition. The basic takeaway, which we shared here on the Josh Hammer Show, the basic takeaway of the SCOTUS oral argument on that day in January of a few weeks ago, the basic takeaway was that it looks like Idaho and West Virginia are probably going to win. And it looks like these laws are going to be upheld. Folks, biological truth is winning. The rainbow jihad is on the descent. Actually, also last week on the show, I talked about how I'm now part of this new campaign. I was in the launch video for this new campaign, the Greater Than campaign, which is this new effort with lots of influencers and social conservative organizations and ministries and this effort to try to overturn the Obergefell case and actually return marriage policy to the states. We'll see if it's successful. That's a tougher slog for sure. But the polling is actually moving back to the center, even on the same-sex marriage issue. We are now in a move back towards sanity. We are seeing something of a regression to the mean when it comes to the American people's views of the LGBT rainbow agenda. And above all, when it comes to the unique social ill of transgenderism, which was recognized for generations as a mental illness, and only until recently was not just bestowed legitimacy, was conferred additional benefits. This is the beginning of the end, God willing. Ultimately, the truth, folks, prevails. We believe that firmly on this show. The truth is clear. Biological truth, natural truth, biblical revelation, it is all true. There are two chromosomal structures, XX, XY. God made man. He created them male and female per Genesis 1:27. The truth will not die. It will be affirmed. We are well on our way towards seeing that. Praise be to God. So a lot of states have been engaging in this fairly rare mid-decade redistricting. You've seen this in Texas. You've seen this in California. You saw a failed redistricting effort in Indiana. Any number of other states as well, both on the Democrat and Republican side of the aisle, are now engaged in what historically has been a fairly rare instance of a state trying to change up its congressional delegation between the two decennial censuses. So in this case, that would be between the 2020 census and the 2030 census. Recall that the census, which is actually constitutionally mandated, that's not a statute, it's actually right there in the Constitution. It is the government is literally required to do this every 10 years. Recall that the census every 10 years is responsible when it comes to the Electoral College count, when it comes to the U.S. House apportionment, and these days when it comes to all sorts of other things as well, when it comes to certain protections under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, when it comes to certain apportionments and funding per various federal block grants. But historically speaking, it was really mostly about the Electoral College and the U.S. House apportionment. Now, we're starting to see some estimates come out. So the Redistricting Network, which is run by, among others, a man by the name of Jonathan Servaas at Carnegie Mellon University, who's helping to spread this there. We're starting to see some numbers when it comes to possible trends in terms of House seats gained, House seats lost from the 2020 census to the 2030 census when it comes to the Electoral College map again, and also the House apportionment. This is the reason that a lot of these folks are trying to do this, to try to get ahead of the curve there. But a lot of these trends have been happening actually for a very long time. And long story short, folks, what do these trends mean? Blue states are losing. Red states are winning. In many ways, it actually really is that simple. Here was our pal Harry Enton a few nights ago on CNN unpacking it. Go ahead and watch Harry.
This isn't just about the House of Representatives, right? It's also about the Electoral College, because the number of electoral votes that each state gets is equal to the number of senators. Each state, of course, has 2, plus the number of House seats that they have. So what would this mean for the House of Representatives? Well, if you remember back in 2024, right, it was all about, we were talking about the blue wall. If Kamala Harris could win the baseline Democratic states and then add in the blue wall states of Michigan, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, she would get to 270 electoral votes. But if all of a sudden we, in fact, have applying the 2025 estimates, the population estimates, to the Electoral College, the blue states plus the blue wall of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin would no longer be enough. Under the current estimates, you get to exactly 270 electoral votes, the minimum needed to win the Electoral College. If, in fact, you apply the 2025 estimates, look at that. You would only get to 263 electoral votes if you were a Democrat, which would mean a Republican victory.
Okay, so long story short, the historic blue wall, which Donald Trump famously broke through in the 2016 election, this blue wall of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, even if Democrats sweep the blue wall, if they sweep the blue wall and they hold all of the other standard Democrat states at this point, they literally do not get to 270. So if the current trends hold, they're going to be in substantial electoral college defense, at least come 2030. Technically, the 2028 presidential election, a little before then, so we won't see it necessarily yet when it comes to the House portion, when it comes to census, but at least come 2032, in the presidential election after that, Democrats really could be in just a world of hurt, frankly. New York and California are projected to lose a combined 6 seats. They are two of the big losers. By the way, the other bottom 5 states, the 5 states that are losing the most people, because it's ultimately done based on people, where they're fleeing, where they're going to. New York, California, New Jersey, Illinois, Massachusetts, the bottom 5 states. Connecticut pretty far down the list as well. It is literally like the most iconic blue states possible that are having people flee these populations quicker than you or I could say Gavin Newsom. And the red states, in general, the red states are gaining lots of seats as well. Texas and Florida leading the list. Texas, number 1 population ingress. Florida was number 1 for a while during COVID, tapered off a little bit. I live in Florida. I can tell you it probably has to do with the cost of living here, honestly, but still really high. Texas and Florida gaining a combined 8 seats in the census based on current trajectories. The other top 5 states are states like North Carolina, Arizona, South Carolina, Tennessee, always very high on the list there. It is the exact states that you would expect. Folks, it's not rocket science, is it? It's really not rocket science. If you are a state and your policies are excessive punitive taxation, and at times I really mean punitive. California under Gavin Newsom has just passed this new billionaires tax, a literal billionaires tax based not necessarily on your liquid assets in your bank account, but on your illiquid prospective hypothetical assets, including possible stock and equity and homes and this and that there. It's deeply immoral, frankly, to tax people on potentially illiquid, not realized gains, but that's what California is doing. And in response to that, they're seeing a ton of their billionaires flee the state. Peter Thiel is apparently, if you believe the reports, is packing up and leaving Los Angeles. Maybe he'll keep a second home there, but he's going to make Miami his main residence. Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, is ditching California, apparently moving to South Florida, probably Palm Beach, if I'm not mistaken. Many other examples abound. It's not rocket science. If you punitively tax and you punitively regulate, New York is another great example, by the way. New York City famously has another municipal city tax on top of an already very, very high state-level tax. It's only going to get higher, by the way, under the comrade-in-chief, Zohran Mamdani, there in City Hall. When you do that, when you have crime, when you have homelessness, when you have drug needles, when you have all the various things that contribute to a rancid quality of life, people are not going to want to move there. Indeed, California, under Gavin Newsom, has actually, for the first time in California history, this will actually be 2 censuses in a row. In 2020, California actually lost representation as well. In 2020, just after Gavin Newsom took over, that was actually the first time that California had lost seats in the House, had lost Electoral College votes since it became a state in the mid-19th century. You know, the old slogan, go west, young man. Well, people actually were doing that. They were going west. California was booming for a very, very, very long time. Back when Ronald Reagan was governor in the 1960s, it was booming. Not anymore, it's not. People are getting the heck out. They're getting the heck out of Dodge. They're going to Texas. They're going to Florida, Arizona, you name it. The red states, by contrast, they're doing a lot right. They're not taxing as much. They're not regulating as much. They didn't go full fascist during COVID. There was no COVID tyranny for the most part in states like Florida and Texas. There's a lot to say about this, folks. But one possible angle to this is not just 2032, after the actual maps will come into place, because Democrats are really going to be in a world of hurt if these trends hold. What about 2028 itself? Gavin Newsom, as of right now, is still the frontrunner when it comes to the 2028 Democratic nomination. If you go to Poly Market right now, He is the strong favorite with a 32% likelihood of getting the nomination in 2028. Humorously, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is actually runner-up at 8%. And you have Josh Shapiro, Kamala Harris, and Pete Buttigieg. I kind of hope they nominate, frankly, Kamala Harris or AOC. What a delight that would be. But if Gavin Newsom is actually the candidate, that says nothing good, frankly, if he's actually the nominee, about the correlation between success measured in the most empirical way possible, like literally people moving in, moving out. It's the old Babylon Bee joke that they ran out of U-Hauls in California. Heck, maybe it's actually not a Babylon Bee joke. Maybe it literally happened, for all I know, especially in places like Los Angeles County and San Francisco. But if the Democrats actually go ahead and nominate Gavin Newsom anyway, which frankly, if you ask me, I think they probably will. As of now, he actually is the frontrunner. He's sleek, he's glib, he's well-spoken, he certainly looks the part. Dude looks like he's a Batman villain. He's straight out of Hollywood Central Casting. If they actually nominate him, what does that say about the extent to at least at which the Democratic Party, and God forbid if the guy wins in general, what does it say about how Americans actually think about literal results in public policy? Well, it'll be a definitive statement, at least, again, within the Democratic Party, that policy doesn't matter. That substance doesn't matter. And that telegenics and looks and visuals and how sleek one talks, that's actually all that matters. Is that the message that you want to send? Heck, maybe for the Democrats it is. That's certainly not our message. We care about policy on our show. We care about law. We care about results. We care about ultimately the flourishing, the health, safety, security, prosperity, and flourishing of the American people. That's what we care first and foremost about here on this show. And frankly, these days, per Harry Enton and per the data, if you want health, security, prosperity, and flourishing, move to a red state, young man. Get out of California, get out of New York. Come to Texas, come to Florida. Your life, frankly, will be improved. So, the Trump administration releasing millions more documents from the Epstein files. Now, if you've been watching this show for a long time, you probably know our stance here on this particular story. There are a lot of folks there who have tabbed me, typically anti-Semites, for being honest with you. Emerald Robinson, who's been fired by numerous cable news channels, has been adding me for a while. I blocked her. I think it's mutual, frankly, and saying, why is that Josh Hammer not talking about the Epstein files? I've gotten this from a lot of these Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens types as well there. And I'll be very honest with you, the reason that we don't necessarily focus tremendously on the Epstein file story, which we will talk about right now, but the reason that we don't necessarily go above and beyond to talk about it is twofold. And these twofold reasons are actually related to one another. On the one hand, I'm a lawyer and I know how this goes. Okay, this conduct, for the most part, this outrageous, disgusting, sordid, filthy, the worst of the worst conduct imaginable. The sex, the trafficking, the pedophilia, the pederasty, disgusting behavior. Disgusting. I feel the moral outrage just as much as you do. I guarantee you I do. But again, these acts happened, folks, 2 decades ago, more or less. The statute of limitations for these crimes has all but assuredly expired. So that's the very first reason that I don't necessarily overly focus there, because I'm not in the business of trying to falsely get your hopes up. There are a lot of folks out there who they talk and they talk and they talk, and they promise a big basket of goods. They promise to be that little leprechaun with a pot of gold on the other side of the rainbow. Keep on following along here. Keep on doing this, doing that, and you will see the reward. That's not what we're about. Why? Because we're truth tellers, and we don't pull punches. We call it like we see it. Okay? I want people in handcuffs, perp walks, mugshots, in bars, lock them in jail, throw away the darn keys. You don't think I want that? You're crazy. Of course I want that. I'm here to tell you, and to be sober with you and just be real here for a second, it's probably not going to happen. That's the very first reason. Now, the related reason that we don't go above and beyond and focus on this particular show is because, to get back to our previous segment about how the blue states are losing, the red states are winning, we care about policy and law. Our focus is on improving the tangible, day-to-day well-being of the American people. The way to do that is with issues like the economy, immigration, crime, inflation. These are the core issues. Yes, on tamping also our enemy nations, China, Russia, Iran, etc. But these are the core things that we focus on. Having said that, the Epstein files now are back in the news. The Trump administration, the DOJ, releasing millions more documents, any number of big names that have been caught up in the fray this time. Steve Bannon actually had a lot of exchanges with Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not really entirely sure exactly what to make of that. Certainly, they seem to have been closer than I think many people are talking about, or at least had previously speculated or realized. Bill Gates, another big name, one of the most powerful names in the world. Bill Gates, famously founder of Microsoft, famously a longtime evangelist and propagandist when it comes to the climate change issue, the climate change hoax, who, by the way, is doing something of a 180 actually on that particular issue. As we explained a little while ago on the show, Bill Gates kind of buried in his personal blog, this blog post in late October, basically saying, you know what? It appears the world is actually not ending. And maybe that's a good thing. So Bill Gates, who's done something of a mea culpa, a very silent, under-the-radar mea culpa on the climate change hoax, is actually very much caught up in this latest Epstein files batch. He is here, and apparently, if you believe this back and forth between him and Epstein there, it's kind of a he said, she said, two of the most disreputable people, frankly, in the Western Hemisphere. Allegedly, what happened here is that Bill Gates, again, he denies this. This is very salacious stuff. Allegedly, he received an STD, a sexually transmitted disease, from potentially a Russian call girl, a Russian prostitute. Melinda Gates, his ex-wife, was actually just on NPR, on one of the NPR podcasts, talking about this, saying that she is so happy to be away from all the muck, that she's just deeply, deeply sad for everything that happened here. And she says that her ex-husband has a lot of questions to answer for. The Clintons are definitely back part of this of this whole Epstein affair as well. This has been one of the interesting parts, by the way, of this whole thing, is that Democrats, Roka Hahn in California, the Democrats who've been pushing the Epstein stuff the hardest there, and ultimately the statute that Congress passed recently to compel the DOJ's disclosure of all the Epstein files was really a bipartisan vote. But the Democrat partisans who have been in on this whole time, people like Ro Khanna, one of their goals seemingly has been to try to get Trump. Okay? Donald Trump, like virtually everyone in power, seems to have known Jeffrey Epstein a little bit. Guess what Trump also did? Trump kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago. He literally kicked him out 15, 20 years ago as soon as he learned that Jeffrey Epstein was who he actually is. A world historical scumbag. An absolutely outrageous, horrific human being engaged in the most sordid deeds imaginable when it comes to underage girls. Trump kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. And it is my working theory that this is actually the reason that Jeffrey Epstein became an anti-Trump fanatic in the later years of his life. He was emailing back and forth with Michael Wolff, the journalist, the discredited Russia collusion hoax journalist. Jeffrey Epstein and Michael Wolff were in constant communication about how to destroy Trump's 2016 bid. Jeffrey Epstein was texting in real time with the non-voting representative of the U.S. Virgin Islands during the Michael Cohen hearing back in 2019, around the time that Michael Cohen was switching from being a pro-Trump operative to being an anti-Trump operative. Okay? So, yes, Trump knew Epstein, so did virtually everyone in power, but he very much didn't like Epstein. The media is not really reporting that, which is why Donald Trump, among other things, that he gets frustrated, as I do, I think, with this story. For instance, go ahead and watch this clip. This is a pretty remarkable exchange between him and Caitlin Collins, basically saying that, can we just move on at this point? Go ahead and watch this.
Nothing came out about me other than there was a conspiracy against me, literally, by Epstein and other people. But I think it's time now for the country to maybe get onto something else.
But what would you say to people who feel like they haven't gotten justice, Mr. President?
Something that people care about. Yeah, what did you say? Go ahead.
What would you say to the survivors who feel like they haven't gotten justice?
You are the worst reporter. No wonder CNN has no ratings because of people like you. You know, she's a young woman. I don't think I've ever seen you smile. I've known you for 10 years. I don't think I've ever seen a smile on your face.
I'm asking you about survivors.
You know why? You know why you're not smiling? Because you know you're not telling the truth. And you're a very dishonest organization, and they should be ashamed of you.
These are survivors of a sexual abuse.
And look, I mean, Donald Trump is broadly correct about this. Okay? Again, this is not the kind of issue that is going to be affecting the American people day to day. Do I want to see justice? Yes. Do I want to see the Clintons testify? You're darn right I do. And apparently the details of this are actually still being worked out, by the way. But apparently the agreement that was reached is that the Clintons agreed to a private closed-door deposition before Jim Comer's oversight committee later this month. But that closed-door deposition will apparently be transcribed and recorded on video. So that's pretty salacious stuff. I expect that the Clintons will just take the fifth over and over and over again. We will see where it goes. The point, folks, is this. I totally understand the folks who are interested more so perhaps than I am when it comes to this story. I totally get it. It's disgusting. Disgusting. It has all the various elements of intrigue. You have money, you have cash, you have Caribbean islands, you have sex and girls and heads of state and Bill Gates. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. I totally get it. Why a lot of the conspiracy theorists, the Alex Joneses of the world, are just going nuts with the story. I get it. I totally get it. I'm just saying that maybe I'm thinking too much like a lawyer. There's not going to be legal accountability here. I'm sorry to say it. There's just not. Maybe there's a statute that I'm not thinking of. Always possible. The best we can hope for is political and moral accountability. And to that extent, yes, the American people deserve all the answers in the world. They deserve full transparency. We do deserve to hold our leaders in both the public and the private sector accountable for the outrageous wrongs that they have committed here, albeit 20 or more years ago, give or take. But at some point, we should, as Trump says, try to move on to the issues that matter on a day-to-day level. Accountability is important, but there are other issues that are important here as well. Striking that balance is something that we are trying to do here. So again, we're not avoiding this story. We're just trying to strike that proper balance, which sometimes, frankly, is easier said than done. So the shortest partial government shutdown in recent U.S. history is now gone. In case you blinked and missed it, over the weekend, there was a partial government shutdown. That partial government shutdown has now been avoided because just yesterday, the U.S. House, by a 217 to 214 vote, passed a measure, roughly $1.2 trillion government funding bill, to end this partial shutdown for now. Now, the catch is that the most controversial part of the federal government funding apparatus in the current climate, which is the Department of Homeland Security, they're actually only funded for about the next 10 days. Literally until next Friday night. So come Friday, February 13th at midnight, so 12:01 a.m. technically on Valentine's Day and Saturday the 14th, DHS could actually be out of money yet again. And Democrats are currently demanding more restrictions on the way that ICE and Border Patrol conduct themselves. Tish James, actually, the Attorney General of New York, announcing that she is putting some legal observers on the ground when it comes to how ICE and federal immigration authorities comport to conduct themselves in New York State. She's basically trying to gin up litigation when it comes to the feds. Disgusting stuff, frankly, for the Attorney General of a state, but par for the course for a two-bit hack like Tish James. In the very left-wing blue state of Maryland, the governor there, Wes Moore, presiding over a legislature that has now passed numerous laws limiting the ability of the state and of local municipalities to cooperate with the feds when it comes to immigration. So some more neo-Confederate type stuff there coming out of the state of Maryland as well. All of this is invariably horrific. We will see if Democrats are able to actually get anything here when it comes to this expiration of this very short stopgap DHS funding measure in 10 days. The irony is that immigration enforcement is actually already funded. So when we talk about DHS funding here, we're not really talking about immigration. We're talking about FEMA. By the way, terrible time to gut FEMA funding. I mean, horrible. Are you kidding? The country's going through historic ice storms. I mean, look, I'm not complaining, but even here in South Florida where I live, this past Sunday, it was actually in the 30s, I think the 20s with the wind chill. That's historic lows, actually, for the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area. I absolutely bonkers. So the whole country is going through something of a freeze. Seems like a very bad time to kind of, play fire with FEMA funding. We'll see if Chuck Schumer ultimately gets his way on any of this. By the way, speaking of immigration, just earlier today on February 4th, the Trump administration, Tom Homan, had a press conference announcing that they are pulling 700 federal agents out of the beleaguered state of Minnesota. Tom Homan is saying that there's been an unprecedented level of recent cooperation from local and county level officials. He's saying that given this increase in unprecedented collaboration, and as a result of the need for less law enforcement officers needed, we are announcing effective immediately that we will draw down 700 people. Look, if that's actually happening, and who the heck am I to question Tom Homan, who we have immense respect for here on the show, fine. I still say that I'm inclined to never trust these people, and you frankly don't trust, and you definitely verify. But this is yet another conciliatory, de-escalatory measure, and yet another data point indicating that the Trump administration, potentially up to and including the president himself, is probably not particularly happy over the aftermath of the Alex Preddy shooting a week and a half ago. Not that Alex Preddy was a saint. He was very far from a saint there, but he did not deserve to die. And the president apparently, if you believe the rumors, is personally not particularly happy with how this went down, not with how the aftermath went down, with some of these statements from Kristi Noem and various other officials as well. So Tom Homan, another conciliatory gesture to Minnesota Democratic leadership, Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, Jacob Fry, Ilhan Omar, etc. We will see if they reciprocate in kind. Frankly, I'm not necessarily getting my hopes up, but again, who am I, frankly, to question Tom Homan's judgment? Now, another thing that's interesting is very much hovering in the background here when it comes to this end of this partial shutdown, actually has to do with an ancillary issue, which is really neither related to here nor there, which is actually election integrity. So Chip Roy, good friend of the show, Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, now running for Texas Attorney General. He's the favorite there in the Republican nomination for sure, based on the polling. Chip Roy introduced a bill in the U.S. House last year called the SAVE Act. So the SAVE Act, which stands for the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, which again is a Chip Roy creation, been endorsed by Mike Lee in the Senate, various other conservative figures as well, would, among other things, require that a condition for registering to vote in federal elections is that you provide proof of U.S. citizenship. Okay? You provide proof of citizenship, and it would end voter registration by mail, online registration, motor voter, all these various other things as well. And it would also make it illegal for non-citizens to register to vote by definition of the citizenship. By the way, how is that not already federal law? That is absolutely bonkers. That is not already federal law there. So that's kind of put to the forefront this whole debate about voter IDs yet again, right? Now, Nicki Minaj, who was conspicuously absent from the ultra-left-wing Trevor Noah hosted Grammy Awards in Hollywood this past Sunday evening, Nicki Minaj, who was on this MAGA bench recently, she actually retweeted or liked one of my tweets for the first time. I don't know. I remember being in college listening to her song Starships, whatever. So, I mean, kind of funny that this girl is based in MAGA now. I can't say I'm complaining. Not really my cup of musical tea, but that's totally fine. Anyway, Nicki Minaj kind of came out with this statement basically saying that she supports voter ID. And you know, how could you oppose voter ID? Well, it turns out, to go back to our pal Harry Enton once again, turns out that voter ID is actually wildly popular. Go ahead and watch Harry again.
American people are with Nicki Minaj, because what are we talking about here? So take a look here. Favor voter ID to vote. Look, I got all this polling on the screen going back since 2018. You'll notice on all of it, it's all north of 75%, 76%, 76%, 76%, 81%, and then 83% in the last year of Americans agree with Nicki Minaj. They favor photo ID to be able to vote.
What about by party? What's the party breakdown?
Yeah, normally you might expect, hey, there'd be a big divide by party with Republicans really for it and Democrats really against it. But not really here. I mean, just take a look here. Favor photo ID to vote. You got 95% of Republicans, pretty much all of them, but even 71% of Democrats favor photo ID to vote. So again, Nicki Minaj posting that on X, and what you see is that the American people, actually, it's not really all that controversial. The American people are with Nicki Minaj.
You know, Harry Enton famously in touch with the Nicki Minaj voter. No, I jest, of course. Look, this is obviously common sense. Okay? The notion that you should be required to provide citizenship to register to vote, that you should provide voter ID to actually vote when you literally go to the poll to vote. I think a lot of foreigners look at this, a lot of Europeans perhaps look at this, and they say, what? This is controversial in America? Actually, not only is it controversial, heck, I remember in 2021, in the first year of the Biden presidency, Georgia, the state of Georgia under Governor Brian Kemp, passed a fairly moderate voter ID law that that Joe Biden called Jim Crow on steroids. Major League Baseball moved their All-Star game out of the Atlanta Braves Stadium that year because of this law. It was nuts. It was absolutely nuts. Because of a law that 71% of Democrats support. Chris Murphy, the utter idiot from Connecticut, by the way, no fan of the SAVE Act, very similar to Joe Biden. Go ahead and watch Chris Murphy on MS Now.
The SAVE Act in and of itself is a terrible piece of legislation, but probably doesn't give the president the power he wants to come in and take over an election. But I do think the president is going to put the screws to John Thune and his allies in the Senate, because his options to steal the election are going to continue to narrow. And so he is likely to want a piece of legislation that may not be constitutional, but at least tests the question to the Supreme Court of whether are circumstances where he can come in and take over a state election.
Oh, yeah. Noted stealer of elections, Donald Trump. Oh, yeah, that's right. What is this dude smoking sometimes? You really have to kind of wonder. Look, constitutional law 101. It is true that in the Constitution, the manners, procedures of elections are handled by the states. That is right there in Article 1 of the Constitution. It's pretty straightforward. On the other hand, there have been any number of dispensations from that general rule throughout American history. Those dispensations have happened at both the constitutional amendment level, that's the 15th Amendment, that provided the franchise for freed blacks or black men. That's the 19th Amendment, which did the same for women. Other subsequent amendments also kind of solidified the 18-year-old voting age. So we do it by amendment, we do it by statute. That's the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So there is precedent for federal electoral legislation. This has to do with nothing less than making sure that the franchise is not diluted and overruled by the illegal alien invasion that the Democrats willfully let in. Make no mistake, this is all about the Democrats' cynical, self-serving desire to, yes, steal, to, yes, rig elections for themselves when it comes to the illegal alien franchise. There is no other reason, none. There is not a single other reason to object to this. I don't buy this stupid, faux, twisted legal logic for a second there. There is precedent for this. There is one reason for illegals to steal the election. That's literally it, and that's frankly all you need to know. Folks, have a great rest of your evening. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Make sure to subscribe everywhere you get your podcast. We'll be right back tomorrow.